What's going on, everyone? You may remember from some of my previous videos that there's a series of Armored Core demo events going on in Japan this month and all the way up through release. Well, the first one's complete, and I'm here with all the details for you. And I want to give a shout out to Mr. Redeye75, who was live on the Armored Core Discord giving us the play-by-play of the event. So some of my info does come from them. I'll drop their link in the description, so please check out their channel. I'm sure they'll have some more info on the event as well. On our first day, the event was held at two different Yodobashi Camera multimedia locations, one in Umeda and one in Akiba. The events didn't start until after 9, but tickets were sold out before 7 a.m. And to say that Armored Core is popular in Japan and that there's hype for number 6 is definitely an understatement. And before we get too deep into it, I want to say that taking any sort of video or photos were strictly forbidden during the event. So I'll just be using the old gameplay footage that we already have access to, though there'll be a couple of pictures here and there. The event had players lining up to try to get a ticket just to get a chance to play the demo, with hundreds or maybe even thousands of people sticking around just to try to watch the event. It was during a limited time frame, so not everybody would get to play. In fact, the vast majority wouldn't. Those lucky few that did would get 15 minutes to try their hand at the same level that we saw in the original gameplay footage. And before I get into too many details, of course I want to give a quick spoiler warning. There'll be some minor story spoilers. Mostly it's mechanics and gameplay related, and of course it's talking about the level itself, so nothing too crazy storyline-wise. But even so, you've been warned. So with that being said, the event kicks off with the mission briefing, which was only played once right at the beginning. Many weren't lucky enough to even get inside for it. Your goal is to infiltrate the RAD facility and make your way to the Intercontinental Cargo Launcher. And it's at this point that they actually give an overview of the whole map of Rubicon. And it seems like the location of the facility you're infiltrating is in a giant crater, potentially the size of a small country. Whether that crater in question is just part of the physical landscape or due to the Great Calamity remains a mystery. But clearly and unsurprisingly, it's unsafe to travel via transport helicopter, which historically has been proven time and time again, as our transport has been shot down more than once in the series. So apparently it's safer and more efficient to load yourself in a giant shell and launch yourself across the country via a giant cannon? Man, talk about a rough line of work. And just a quick note here, for anybody who's played the older games, you'll know that if you go over your weight capacity, you'll go into a status called overburdened, or overweight, depends on the translation. But regardless, all of the staff shirts for the event say overburdened, which I think is hilarious. I feel that deep in my soul. As far as all the gameplay setups for both events, they used PlayStation 5s and a physical demo disc. So, demo disc confirmed, I guess? Even if you'll probably never get it? During the event, it obviously would have been too difficult to give all the players access to a garage for their 15-minute time slot, so you're given 3 options: a middleweight biped, a lightweight reverse joint, or a middleweight tetrapod. Interestingly enough, tanks were not available for this one. And from everything we've heard from other content creators that got their hands on it, tanks can be a little bit more difficult to play, it seems like. Especially when fighting bosses, the skill cap might just be a little bit higher as they do function very differently from the other leg types. Though it's also sounding like they're not very suited for some of the boss battles in this level, so it could just be that they wanted it to be fairly user-friendly for people new to the game. And I don't want to go through the entire level piece by piece, and we've already seen a lot of the gameplay details from the recent releases of gameplay footage, so what I really want to focus on here are new aspects that we haven't seen before, or just interesting details about the gameplay in general that we hadn't heard about yet. One aspect of level design that we haven't gotten a chance to really talk about yet is environmental hazards, and they are back for this one. In this level specifically, there are lava pits that will damage you over time if you stand in them. Conversely, you can kick enemies into them, and they'll take that damage effect as well. So environmental hazards are back. What do you think? Will we get an Armored Core Poison Swamp? We also get our first look at what happens when you leave the mission area. The computer says something to the effect of you leaving the mission area and autopilot engaging. The screen will fade to black, and then you'll pop up where you were before you left. It also seems to be a similar effect if you just fall out of the mission area. Another interesting piece that we see several times through the gameplay is ambushes. Ambushes seem to be very much a thing in Armored Core 6, at least in this level. We see a spot where we're hacking open one of the doors just to have enemies fall behind us. So don't overlook that hacking portion on your head stat. Being able to do it quickly may just be more important than we think. There's even a spot where the players scan the room and underneath the floor were tons of spider MTs just waiting to ambush him should he drop down a level. So yeah, there's multiple paths in this one, but they are certainly not all safe. Though let's be honest, none of them are safe. And speaking of surprises, we do get a surprise mini-boss during the level, an enemy AC that uses the chainsaw. So of course we get those sweet details on what the chainsaw likely behaves like. It does seem to function as a sort of physical blade with a prolonged use that causes high stagger damage. The AC in question attacks you and holds it on you long enough to be able to stagger you, followed up by a shotgun blast. So it seems a little bit backwards from the majority of the melee weapons we've seen, where they're used to follow up an attack after you stagger the opponent. This one, at least upon first glance, seems to be to stagger the opponent, and then you follow up with whatever else you have. And the crowd seem to absolutely love this guy. He's named Stomper and has the emblem of a foot, which we've seen before, and sort of expected it was the Tenderfoot emblem. I haven't gotten confirmation on if this is actually him, but either AC6 has a thing for feet, or this is his emblem. Regardless, he has what everybody described as a great personality. Not sure what that means, but he was popular, so I look forward to meeting him on the battlefield. Also interesting to note, and sort of expected, is that you can't run away from boss fights. The levels are huge and fairly open, but upon encountering one of the boss battles, a red barrier will pop up around the area. Though part of me is curious if there's any sort of actual canon explanation for the barrier, or if it's just a game mechanic that happens. We also get a look at the death screen, and it doesn't seem, at least at first glance, to have any canon reason that you can just respawn right there. Most likely it's just a game mechanic in there. Which is not super surprising, but a little bit disappointing. We had speculated a lot on kind of a canon reason for being able to respawn. May still be in there, but it's looking doubtful. Which, not a big deal, but a shame regardless. The mission, of course, ends with our battle against the Smart Cleaner, affectionately known as the Roomba. And it doesn't entirely play out like we've seen in previous videos. It seems he spends most of the match slowly moving towards the player, and though his chimney and a spot on the back are weak points, he also has a sort of mouth that opens up on the front, and that seems to be the easiest one to get to. The chimney in question almost seems to be a trap. You see, this guy does damage, like a lot of damage. People described it as being hit for between 3,500 all the way up to being one shot. And like any good boss, this one seems to be there to teach you good energy management and not just running out of energy and dropping beside the boss. Because if you stop moving, he's on you and you're dead. Though an interesting, albeit maybe not great thing, is that the tetrapod legs, or the quad legs, depending on what you call them, seem to totally trivialize this fight. See, the Roomba only really has one attack that reaches vertically, that chimney eruption that we've seen in footage before. So as long as you're using a tetrapod, you can just hover in the air and maintain a little bit of distance so you're not hit by the fireballs, and there's nothing he can really do. You occasionally land on the outskirts of the arena to recover some energy, jump back into the air, and continue hovering. Meanwhile, you just pelt that mouth that opens occasionally from a distance, and it's safe. The person who finally beat it almost didn't even take damage at all. But that being said, even people who did use the tetrapod legs, if they had bad energy management and ran out of energy in the air and dropped to the ground close to him, died immediately. So it isn't that he's necessarily easy, but it seems like as long as you know what you're doing and you have the right parts, that he likely is. And that's been one of the reoccurring themes the developer has talked about, right? That you have to cater your parts and your build to the mission. And this one in question just happens to be tetrapod legs. I'm willing to bet that this guy's a challenge for tank legs, with them being slower moving and not having great aerial energy management. It's probably quite difficult to keep away from him, especially with his long reach on the ground. That's likely why they didn't include tank legs in this one. And it's something, of course, everybody was a little worried about, that some of the bosses would be really difficult with tank legs. Though, considering this one's so easy with tetrapods, but maybe not so much for the reverse joints or the bipedal, It's safe to say that there's probably some bosses that are really easy with tank legs, and really terrible with tetrapod legs. Just reinforcing that theme that it's all about changing up your build to suit the mission. Though, hey, you do you. If you want to play the entire game with a close-range chainsawing tank mech, I certainly will not complain. And one thing I want to say is that, yes, people did beat it with the tetrapod legs. Yes, if you've played AC before and you have a good grasp of the mechanics and you have good energy management, it does seem to sort of trivialize this particular fight. But the level in question, and really even the boss in question, aren't easy by any means. It took around an hour, hour and a half for somebody to finally beat this thing, or at least for it to pop up on the main screen for people to see. And there were people that died on many other parts of the level. There are lots of people that didn't even make it to the Roomba. Some people that didn't make it to the mid-boss AC, or some people who died to the mid-boss AC. So I don't want to come out here and say that the level is easy. It seems to be very challenging for a lot of people. And I'm sure that'll be the case when the game releases as well. And most likely this is an early level, so I'm sure it is going to be on the easier side of the difficulty spectrum. And much like the Goliath from the gameplay footage we saw before, this boss seems to be there to teach you a specific mechanic or gameplay technique, in this case, managing your energy and avoiding staying on the ground. And once the boss was defeated, that was pretty much the end of it. So whether there's actually more after that or not, we're not really sure, though I expect the Roomba is at least the final boss to that level. And so with that event done, there are a few more upcoming. We've got one on July 30th, August 5th, August 6th, August 12th, August 13th, and August 20th. And naturally, we don't know if these events are going to be the exact same level or the exact same ACs. That's my expectation, but we'll have to find out when they happen. Regardless, if new information comes out of it, you can bet I'll cover it. In the meantime, I'm still working my way through the hours upon hours of new gameplay footage that we have, albeit in 20-minute increments. So stay tuned for more news, videos, breakdowns, etc. Until then, I'll see you next time.